Hi, this is Stephanie Czajkowski, and you're listening to the FSF podcast.
Good afternoon and welcome to the FSF podcast. I'm Tim, I'm your host, and our guest today is an amazing actress, and no doubt you've seen her in shows like Doom Patrol as Hammerhead, Bex Dawson on MacGruber, or Star Trek's Picard as the Vulcan science officer, Lieutenant Tavine. Now, that's just to name a few of the characters that she's been. But we wanted to bring her on the show not only because of the fact that, well, she's a badass on screen. Yeah, really, she is. You got to go check it out. But she's just as awesome in real life. I've been able to do a little bit of research on her, or technically and technically we call it a gentle light stalking with the bow of research on it, but it's all kind and good, well-natured. But don't worry, we're going to get to all of that in just a few minutes as to all the cool things I found out about her. But without any further ado, I'm very, very excited to welcome Stephanie Czajkowski to the FSF podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. I've been practicing your last name, by the way. Did I get it right?
You did. It's so funny because like part of me is like, why didn't you change it? And I'm like, it's always been a conversation starter, but I'm in telling people how to say it. It's just like Czajkowski, which was like what my third grade teacher was always like, Stephanie Czajkowski, and forever I've been using that. I think I even put it in my IMDb my IMDb profile, just so people knew.
Yeah. And that's where I found that Czajkowski, and so I've been practicing it, like saying it like that. Well, it's funny that you had that in there, because so when people look at my last name, which is Beisiegel, it's spelled Beisiegel.
Yeah.
People have a hard time pronouncing that, and I always tell them, you're saying bye to a seagull, bye seagull. Yeah. And so now, I have people who still to this day who've heard me say that years ago will come up to me like, hi, Beisiegel. But whatever. Hey, whatever.
Whatever works is what is
exactly. I'm at the point in my life where I no longer care how people pronounce my name.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. I'm like, whatever. You're talking to me. I know you're talking to me.
Exactly.
I'm not going to get up in arms about it.
I always feel like when I've had people I guess get more known, or because I've been in things that people see me in, that will ask me if Czajkowski, because technically if you do some research, Czajkowski, my spelling is, I guess, can be related to Czajkowski. And so people will be like, is it Czajkowski? And I'm just like, I'm from Wisconsin. We just say Czajkowski. I don't know. I'm like, if it makes you feel better, sure. But I always feel like somehow when I don't have a perfect answer for them, I'm somehow disappointing them.
I'm from Wisconsin. I love that answer. That's great.
I'm from Wisconsin, man. Yeah.
We didn't ask about that while we were eating our cheese curds, so whatever.
We did not.
Did not. No. All right. So Stephanie, normally to start off our show, there's a question I love to ask every one of our guests, but I'm going to shelve that for the moment.
Okay.
I'm like, breaking tradition. Yeah. Yes, I'm breaking tradition with you, because I found something else in my research of you, and now I know you've talked about this quite often, including your own social channels, and I hope you don't mind talking about this a little bit more. But I found out about your battles with cancer, and the fact that you survived not one but 3 separate types of cancers, which to me is just, you go. That's awesome. And then you have
a great year, is what it is.
Yeah, I can. Oh God, I can't even imagine. But then, you have your blog, and there's the podcast, ChemoSkinny, as well. And I'm hoping that maybe you can tell us a little bit about your journey through cancer and what your blog and podcast, ChemoSkinny, can offer to people who are maybe starting the early phases of their own fight.
Thank you for asking. I found that when my husband and I had to go through cancer when I was first diagnosed, I had come out of a year, and I feel like as I get older, more people I see experiencing it, where you just have people, you start to get to an age where people are dying, right? And my uncle, my dad, and my roommate from college had died within it was 3 months. It was Memorial Day, Labor Day, and then a couple months later. And it was just a year. It was 2017, and it was just a year that just throw me back on my axis in a way that you're trying to
Hmm.
contemplate where you are in the world. If you've ever lost a parent, I've now lost both of my parents. And when you lose a second parent much earlier than you think you will, you kind of recontemplate everything a little bit, because I kind of feel as if you're suddenly an actual adult because you don't have someone there to parent you, right? So
Fair.
when I was first diagnosed, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer first, and really fast on the heels of it, which is what started the blog. I had been diagnosed with thyroid cancer, which a lot of people are, and it seemed like a simple cancer. The doctor said, "Oh, we're just going to cut it out," and so they just cut out my thyroid. But the week before that was supposed to happen, I was actually putting myself on tape for, of all things, I was putting myself on tape for the Jungle Cruise, because one of my agents had gotten into their head that I could play the Amazonian, like they have Trader Sam, who's an is an
Hmm.
Amazon. But I was like, I'm not the kind of Amazon they're looking for. Like, I'm tall and Amazonian in like the Wonder Woman sense, but not in the, indigenous people to the world. Like, I'm
Yes,
like, it doesn't
gotcha. Okay.
quite. So I put myself on tape for it anyway. I made up some backstory. I'm like, she was orphaned. It's like Tarzan. And I was putting on this bustier top, and I lifted up my right breast, and I felt this lump. And I called my husband in the room, and his joke is always like, and I was like, yeah. And I was like, no. And it was the Saturday before I was supposed to go in for the surgery, for the thyroid surgery. I did the thyroid surgery, then had a mammogram, and then at my 2-week follow-up, while they were telling me the thyroid was fine, I found out I had breast cancer.
Oh man.
And it was one of those things that it came into be. It was just kind of another pile on, but because the previous year had been so much, I just was at a point where I didn't know what it would mean, specifically what it would mean for my career, right? Because the lump was pretty big. I found out pretty fast I was going to have to go in for a double mastectomy. And then once I did that, I was going to have to go for chemo and radiation. And I was just kind of struck at the fact that I didn't know if I'd work again. I didn't know if I would work for a couple of years. I kind of had to rectify that fact. And what was crazy about it is right before I went in for the double mastectomy, breast cancer was like the best thing that happened to my career, which is insane. Because right before I went in for my double mastectomy, I booked a job in Call of the Wilds,
Hmm.
playing like the postmaster in a scene with, I don't talk directly with Harrison Ford, but it was pretty big. It was shooting the week I was officially going to be recovered from doing this surgery. And it was just, I went and I did it. And then I did that job. And then right after I left it, I went in for chemo, and then I shaved my head, and then found out I had another cancer and got Doom Patrol. So it was this bizarre scale of awful. And at the same time, all these amazing things were happening to
Wow.
kind of weirdly counterbalance it. But in the middle of it, right before I went in, I had learned with thyroid cancer that as I was telling people things were happening, that the breast cancer was going to be a bigger thing. And I didn't want to have to repeat the story over and over again, because as I found with
Hmm.
fellow cancer nomies, as we call them, it's exhausting. And
Right.
everybody has an opinion, and a lot of stuff comes back to you. And so I ended up being like, well, I need to do something creative. I don't have the bandwidth to lie about this right now. I don't have the bandwidth to hide it. And so
Hmm.
I made the choice to just be really open about it. So I started a blog with my husband, because I also thought it was really important. As I mentioned, both my parents are dead. One of my mother died of a rare blood cancer in 2009, and I thought
Okay.
it was important to try and get the perspective of the caregiver, or the person who is going through it with you, but doesn't have the cancer. Because in a lot of ways, I feel like even though I'm taking the drugs and doing the surgeries, I actively get to do something. Your partner,
Right.
your loved one, whoever they are, has to sit there and watch. And being helpless or feeling helpless is, in a lot of times, a lot worse. So part of the writing of the blog was I went looking for information to know what things felt like. And they all seemed either really clinical or no one or everyone wanted to kind of bright light it. Like, it was amazing. It was fine. And I just wanted someone to tell me the truth. Or I
Sure.
wanted somebody, and I wanted the truth. And so I did the blog because I wanted to at least be like, this is what this feels like to me. To me, this was my journey. Maybe it will be for you. Maybe it will help. I don't know. And in the midst of it, that we had, and this is very long, I apologize. In the midst of it, we had friends because, we live in Hollywood who are like, you should be doing a blog. And I'm like, I do not want to be blogging or podcasting, rather. You should be podcasting. And I'm like, I don't feel like I want to be fully that vulnerable on a microphone, which, I could always choose not to put out in the world in this moment in time, because it's easier for me to contemplate it while thinking about it and then put a blog out into the world than it is to sit and have to talk about what you're going through. Because when you're going through something like this, when you're going through a physical illness, especially cancer, it's like running a marathon a little bit. You get in and you do all the things or it's like having a big event. You're not thinking about how you feel in the moment or what you're going through. Generally speaking, you're just trying to get through it. And you don't really realize kind of what happened until you're on the other side, which also no one talks about, because you think you're like, oh, I'm going through it all. And then it's over. Or like, when I was equated to, because I've dealt with a lot of death of someone dies and you do the funeral and you do the celebration. And the hardest day is always the day after all that happens, because it's the day that you recognize the space that's in your life for the person who's gone.
Mm-hmm.
So my intent, whether it be yes or no, is when we did the podcast, the first thing was the blog was kind of, selfish a little bit. It was to let people know what was happening without having to tell everybody individually. And it was also trying to give a little funny about some of the stuff that happened, because it was ridiculous in its own right. But it also ended up being for people. I found that other people had friends who were going through it. They would direct them to this blog, and they felt like they weren't going through it alone. So when 2020 happened and everybody started a blog or a podcast, we decided to do the same thing because we had time, and did a 12 episode, I think it's 12 episode, where we went back, looked at our blogs, and also looked at it where we were now, to be like, what did we go through? How did we feel about it then? And if we could tell ourselves something now, what would we tell them? And we always, it's, the podcast is called ChemoSkinny, the blog we hope you never have to listen to, because the only one who's going to listen to it is somebody who's looking for it. And the people who've looked for it found it. And that our hope in putting it out in the world was to be like, hey, we went looking for people who would be like, hey, guess what? Post-cancer, they never tell you about how you have to figure out how to have sex again because everything's all screwed up. So we just wanted to have it be out there so whoever found it, whoever needed it would find it, basically, is long and short.
No, that's a beautiful answer. And you don't have to worry about how long your answers goes. Long answers are always good answers.
Oh,
So,
thanks.
I one of the things that I liked about your blog now, as close as I can relate to any of the situation with your yourself and your husband, is that my daughter was 12 years old at the time, but she came down with a chronic illness called Guillain-Barré syndrome. It's an autoimmune disease that attacks the central nervous system.
Oh, God.
And when she got sick, everybody and their brother had an opinion about how she got sick, why she got sick, what was going on.
Right.
And we were much in the same way, trying to find, we just needed somebody to not give us the clinical words that none of us understood.
Yeah.
And we needed a dose of reality and talking to people who had gone through it. And, and so we did much the same thing. We went out and looked, for blogs and Facebook groups and all these different things, and real people going through real things and real feelings. You find very quickly that there's a lot of those that you need to leave right away because they're just about as negative as can be.
Yeah.
But one of the things I liked about your blog was that there is that heavy dose of reality without, it's not it's not where I felt like you were shining, trying to shine sunshine up somebody's, rear end. But on the other hand, you know, I felt like you were okay. Here's the real side of it. Here's the sunshine side of it, and these two things can coexist, but you have to look for the one to find the other. And
Yeah.
I liked that of it. And you mentioned something too about your husband as the caregiver, because that's my primary job. I'm a stay-at-home dad. I'm the primary caregiver at home. You know, that helpless feeling of wanting to, because as my daughter was laying there in the hospital bed, um, she was paralyzed from the neck down we were in the ICU for like 35, 36 days, something like
Oh
that.
my goodness.
And it is a very helpless feeling as the person who's not dealing with the disease. There's not much I can do other than, you need a pill. Okay, well, let me go get you some pills. I'll bring them to you. Here you
Yeah.
go. Here's some water, you know, um, other than trying to be there, be supportive. So I understand that role very much. And so seeing the blog from both of your perspectives was actually kind of neat for me, because, I'm illness adjacent to
Yeah.
some of the things
You
that you guys went through.
exactly right.
And so I had a deep appreciation for a lot of the things that you put in there. And I just thought it was a very encouraging blog, because like I said, I think that you put a dose of reality in there. You put a dose of humor in things. And I like, and I like your writing style. So that helped. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
just the right amount of snark. I loved it. So,
Yeah. Yeah. We try to, just a little bit of the snarky. I mean, I think it's, I think to your point of, shining sunshine, I think that you can be, there was a woman named Barbara Ehrenreich who passed away a couple years ago, who, when she was diagnosed with, she was a sociologist, I believe, and she wrote some amazing, amazing books. And one of them she wrote was called Bright Sided. And it was about when she got breast cancer, how everyone was like, just be positive, to a point where you're negating the fact that you actually have to own. You get to, I think there's like a sliding scale of, you can be optimistic, you can be rationally, I think she said rationally optimistic,
mhm.
but you have to be able to hold the fact that something is happening and not deny it. Because if you're denying it, that's not good for you either. And it doesn't help the
No,
situation, right?
yeah, you can't disconnect from reality.
Yeah.
I mean, you
I
can
mean,
be
you can
optimistic and
sometimes. Yeah.
yeah, well,
Yeah, of
yeah,
course. Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, for the most part, you have to live in reality. You have to exist in the real world, and these are the things that are really happening. And so it's kind of
Exactly.
yeah,
How is your
yeah.
daughter doing?
She's doing much better.
Good.
So she did end up walking out of the hospital. Um, so the doctor said, as long as we were not expecting her to ever to be a marathon runner, she should be okay for the rest of her life. She's
Good.
never going to get rid of it. She'll be autoimmune for the rest of her life. Um, and there's some other challenges that come along with Guillain-Barré being, so she has muscle pain and joint pain every day, and once
Mhm.
every couple months she has to go get shots in her hips and knees, cortisone shots to help her be able to function because her joints
Yeah.
hurt so bad.
Yeah.
But as long as we're not expecting her to be an Olympic runner, I think we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
there's some challenges that come along with it, and we just kind of roll with those by day. But then there was the mental health challenges after we got her home, and helping her to learn how to be a teenager with an illness and deal
Yeah.
with all of that, because she never felt like she got to be the normal teenage girl, the normal, go through the normal girl things. And so there was some challenges there, but I think we're on the right path, and I think we're doing good there. So we'll take it.
Good.
We'll take where
Good
we're
for,
at now
yeah.
over where we were.
No, exactly.
So
Yeah. I'm like, a
all
bed at
right, so
home is
here's a
always better
question.
than a bed in the hospital. Anyway, continue.
Absolutely,
Moving
yeah.
on.
All right, so yeah, so here's a question for you in a different lane.
Mhm.
Now, we mentioned some of the roles that you had in the intro, like your work on Doom Patrol, your work on Picard, both very, very cool roles. And there are tons of actors and actresses who would have killed for those roles. So kudos to you for getting cast
Thank you.
in those things. Those are very, very big feathers in your cap. Now, one of the things I like to ask people who, especially if they're in one of the big, I call them the big two, they're Star Wars and they're Star Trek, and those are massive IPs out there with
Yeah.
huge cult followings. I
Yes.
mean, you know, I'm a Star Warsian. I like Star
Hmm.
Wars more than Star Trek. But I get it. I get it. So when and I want at some point in my life just to have my name somewhere in a credits line. It can be the holder of water. I don't care. I just want to see my name up there somewhere somehow. I'm working for it. We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But what does it mean to you personally to have been on a show like Picard with such a huge fan base behind it? And were you a fan of Trek before getting cast?
I'm like, which way do I answer this? It's a couple, I'm gonna go this. I'm like, which way do I say? Um, I was a fan. I was a fan somewhat by association because it was threaded through my life. My father was a very, very big fan. I remember
Okay.
when I was growing up, when I was, I think, 5 years old, he did night school and he used to
Okay.
do his homework on this green sofa on the weekends. And we would sit by his feet while he was doing it, and he would watch the original series in syndication. And so that was part of my growing up. Then when the movie came out, to my recollection, the Star Trek, the movie, I believe was the first movie I remember seeing in a theater. And
Okay.
I remember the bald lady, like I remember the movie. Um, as it went on, when Next Generation came out, or I'm sorry, when Voyage Home came out, my mother was a seamstress and worked for a costume shop. And before it was cool to be a cosplayer, it was my first experience with Trekkies. And she actually made cosplay outfits. She made the Admiral jackets and things like that for people who are going to
Oh,
see the
neat.
Voyage Home, which are a very difficult thing to make, by the by, like if you do it well. My father, they ended up
Yeah.
getting divorced. He was still doing, he was still a fan of The Next Generation. I became a fan. I was a fan of Patrick Stewart. I was also a fan of Star Wars because I'm of the generation that's when it first came out. So I mean,
Hmm.
Han Solo, when I was on that movie with Harrison Ford, I was fainted. Um,
Yeah, that'd have been me.
but it wasn't I did not understand how deeply the fanhood and the reverence for this franchise affected me until I walked onto that bridge. It was a semi religious experience. It was something that I made a point of because it's very easy to go to work and be like, oh, I'm here, blah, blah, blah. And then it's gone and it's over. And I was really conscientious every day to take a moment and look around and recognize where I was and recognize how lucky I was there, how lucky I was to be there, how when I got that first script and I realized that season 3 was going to basically be a reunion of the next generation, how iconic this season in and of itself was going to be, and how I got to be a small part of it. And to that point, I didn't recognize, I knew and felt how special that was. And it wasn't until, and I had been told about the fans and the fandom, but I did not realize the level of dedication and the warmth. I love this fandom. I feel so honored to be a part of this franchise. But when the previews came out during the AC, I think it was the ACF the college football games, I did not expect. I just did not expect. I wasn't fully prepared for it, and I just as I keep meeting fans and as I keep going, I've been invited to conventions. I just recognize. I think Jonathan Frakes said at one point in time the responsibility of being a part of something that is so beloved by people, and it's really an honor. It's just it's and I never imagined that once something was over, you would appreciate it even more as you went along. Like it doesn't like usually you do a job and you move on, right? And this one has become even more special as the days go on.
I think even for me, now I've become more of a Trek fan over the last couple of years.
Mm.
Strange New Worlds was kind of my gateway drug
Yeah.
into, because I had watched a little bit of Prodigy, and I was like, oh, this is entertaining. And I watched a
Yeah.
little bit of Lower Decks. I really liked Lower Decks, but I really bit into Strange New Worlds.
Yeah.
And so
They're
that's
doing a
kind of
great
what got me into Trek. And I went back and I started watching. I watched the original series. I
job.
watched the original animated series,
Oh my
which
God.
I think
Yeah.
you have to be. I think you have to have a certain blood alcohol content to be able to appreciate that show every episode. Yeah, I got to be a
Yeah,
little drunk, I think, to appreciate some of
Yeah.
those episodes.
Yeah.
But um, and then of course started watching going because I never really watched TNG when it first came out. I
Mhm.
was one of those who just avoided it because I didn't like Kirk. I've never been a fan of Kirk, and I've
Okay.
always been open about that.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, I don't want to watch that. It's stupid. It's going to be more about Kirk. And I
Yeah.
judged TNG on I judged the book by its cover, so I just skipped it
Right.
entirely when I was a kid. I regret that now because I've gone back through and I've watched it and I've enjoyed it and all those other things. But I think even for me to walk on that stage and to see the bridge and be there would be very momentous. And
Yeah.
I can only appreciate for somebody, the closest I could put that is for me being as big of a Star Wars fan as I am, and my son's middle name is Harrison, by the way. Um, I think for me to walk on the Millennium Falcon, because Han Solo is my favorite character. I
Yeah.
love the Millennium Falcon. For me to walk on the Millennium Falcon, I would probably cry. I know I
Yeah.
would,
Yeah.
because it would be just that moment in life for me. So I can appreciate what you said about walking onto the bridge and having that moment. And I think it's so cool though too that you said that you made time every day to make sure that you were appreciating where you were, because I don't think enough people do that. I think that there's, it's just like, oh, well, it's a job and I'm here, I'm going to do my job.
Yeah.
They appreciate it for a little bit and then they let it fly.
Yeah.
Um, but
Well,
I
it's
love
hard
seeing
sometimes,
posts on, well, yeah, of course.
Like, it's hard.
Yeah. But I like it too, though, when I go onto socials and I see people posting behind the scenes shots of things that, of just little candid photos on set. And because that moment, that time meant so much to them.
Yeah.
And it's cool that they're able to share those type of things. So yeah, I think that's a really cool. That's a great answer, by the way. I just wanted
Oh, thanks. Yeah,
to add on to this.
I was so afraid because this was one of the. I mean, I had to sign an NDA for Doom Patrol as well, but I came on the first season and it was a new show. And I was so afraid to take pictures on Picard because I was so afraid I was going to get in trouble. I was always like, but I did have one of my favorite shots is one of my, I guess, love languages, whatever, is I like to buy gifts for people. And
Sure.
and we were wearing masks because it was still during COVID. We were still like heavily in COVID protocols. And I went on Etsy and bought matching masks for what I called the new kids. So it was for me and Jen and Ashley and Joseph and Todd, because I knew Todd from before. And then when Ed came along, I got him a black one because I was like, you're the black sheep. But I remember getting them and leaving them for people, and they matched. Everyone's matched their uniform. And I will never forget Frakes being like, where's my, everyone's like, where did you get that? And I was like, and I remember just being like, I'm sorry, I didn't think to, I was just like, it's our first time together. It was so funny. But yeah, it was a good set to be on. It was
We're
a
the new
really good
kid
set.
gang.
It's a really good gang, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, we've had opportunity to talk to a couple different people who were at different points in the Picard series, and
Yeah.
everybody seems to have the same level of appreciation for what went on in the set and how the set was run and everything else. So that's very cool. I mean, I'm now talking with you. We've talked with Todd Stashwick. We
Yeah.
talked with Adele Pomeranke. She was in season 1, I believe,
Yeah.
and a couple others. And it's just been very cool for people to say, about how much they appreciated the Picard set and how there's a different feeling on that set, they said, than a lot of others that they've been on. A very family a very
Yeah.
family friendly feeling. I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but I think you
Yeah.
get it.
They
So,
welcome you. Well,
uh,
it's easy. I think it's easy for especially productions that are in the run and they're going. And sometimes you're not on all the time, but in particular with TNG being having this history of everybody, it'd be really easy for, the I call them the big kids to come on and just be like, well, whatever. But instead it was this ingratiation of, or even, us as bridge crew who are there but not necessarily doing heavy lifting, just being welcomed in. And that was for us, for me and Jin and Joseph, it was very much from Terry, from the top down, of being starting from him and also coming from Patrick. And it was just everyone together. And it's really lovely because I've been on sets where it's not that it's bad. It's like, you're coming in for a day or coming in for a week, and everybody else has been there for so long, and being able to be there for the long haul is really fun. It's really fun.
excellent. All right. So through the actually your answer, and we passed it up a long time ago because I asked you
Oh,
some secondary questions, but
yeah, yeah.
you mentioned this, and it would have been a great segue into my next question. So I'm going to reach back to
Okay.
re-segue the segue. Uh, but you talked about going to Comic Cons. Now I love
Yeah.
talking to people about their Comic Con experience because we attend a couple different ones either as press or as participants of the Comic Con.
Mhm.
And so with your attendance at Comic Cons, and you shared pictures on your socials, or people have brought you things that dressed up and cosplayed as your characters, all these different type of things. Do you have a story of an interaction at Comic Con with a fan that has meant the most to you?
I'm like, yes, there was in the last one I went to Galactic Diversity Con in Philadelphia about a month ago, 3 weeks to a month ago. And there was, I can't remember her name right now, and it makes me sad. I want to say it's Nancy, maybe. Um, who came up, and they have an entire posse of people who are Picard fans and are Star Trek fans. And sometimes as an actor, you're kind of like, yeah, I was there, but I didn't really say much, or I didn't really do much comparatively because someone else got to, talk a lot. And they were so struck. She was so struck by the performance of Tavine in such a meaningful way that I literally started crying, like tears started going. And you forget that, I forget that, what we do matters. Because sometimes Todd said once, he's like, what we do is ridiculous. We dress in costume, we pretend to be somebody else. And thankfully they put it on tape, because otherwise we're just like playing around. And then you interact with someone like that who is so sincere,
Hmm.
and it's complimentary because, but it's also it's really humbling. It's really humbling. But that was probably one of my best experiences at Comic Con.
That's
Oh,
pretty
and then
awesome.
second to it, I was at Rhode Island Comic Con, and a bunch of kids came dressed as the Doom Patrol, and they were fantastic. Like they had
Oh,
it
that's great.
down. They had it down. No one came as Hammerhead because that's a bigger commitment unless you're really good at a bald cap.
Yeah, yeah. Bald cap is either you don't have the hair or you're bald capping well.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, having gone to as many Comic Cons as I have, I've seen different levels of fandom, and one of the coolest things I've ever seen. So we had an opportunity to interview him here on the show, but Cal Dodd, he's the voice of Wolverine for X-Men '97
Okay.
and X-Men, um, and he was standing in line, and he was at his booth rather, and there's this gentleman standing in line with his son. Now, as when I get my press passes and I'm going up to talk to somebody, I always get in line with everybody else. I'm not trying to cut line, trying to do
Hmm.
anything like that. But I'm standing behind this guy, and he's very quiet, very reserved, kept to himself. And he got up to Cal and just told him, introduced himself, introduced his son, and he had the Wolverine claws on, on his hands.
Yeah.
And he took them off and he reached out and he shook Cal's hand. And it was just very brief, and he turned and walked away. And I look over and his wife just immediately burst into tears. Apparently this man is on the autistic spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
and he has a hard time with physical contact with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And he hasn't allowed other people other than his wife or his child to touch him in years.
Oh my God.
And he walked up to Cal Dodd and shook his hand. And his wife is explaining this to me, and then I'm finding myself in the line crying. I'm like, okay.
Of course. Yeah, right?
Yeah. I'm like, okay, yeah, all right. But it's experiences like that and I love hearing stories like what you shared and seeing things like that, because it does reinforce to me that, yeah, this is all nerdy make-believe, and it's all, it's all for fun, but it matters. It really does matter to people.
Yeah.
And it takes a very big portion of people's hearts, and with everything they have and everything they do. And it's very fun to watch at the cons and see people, in there. And I get excited watching people in their cosplay and
Right.
everything they're doing. Some people, they're like, well, I had this just laying around the house and I made it work. And some people, they really go for it. And the ones that go for it, ooh, man, they really put some hours and some time into it. And
Yeah.
that's
No,
really
they've really
cool
got a
to see.
special talent. It's such Comic-Con it's so full of joy. And I think
It
that
is.
it really is unbridled joy, and it's a place where everyone feels comfortable to express that joy. Because I feel like sometimes you need, I guess, parameters. People feel like in the world at large to be joyful, to have that kind of like unfettered joy, it needs to be in a specific place. It's like, and I'm all for it. I'm all for it.
Absolutely. I mean, you get to meet the people who do the things that you love. You get to see people expressing their joy for the things they love.
Yeah.
You get to buy some really cool click clack math rocks.
There you go. Yeah.
I bought those at the last show I was at.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's all these cool things, and so yeah, I just love hearing stories like that. So thank you for sharing.
Oh, you're welcome. I was
All
like,
right.
I was like, I have one more to add on. When I was also at
Oh,
Rhode
please.
Island. No, I will. I was sitting next to Diane Guerrero, who played Jane, and there was someone who came up and talked to both of us. I talked to her first, but was just talking about how Doom Patrol in particular dealt with mental illness, and how at a really dark place it gave them hope. And you're just, you're, as somebody who's not directly related, to know that you had a small part in helping is just, because that's ideally what I think I want to do in the world, is at least leave it a better place than I came in, to do no harm.
No, I think that's great. Fantastic. All right, so I said there was a question that I like to start every interview with, and I didn't. So I'm going to
Right. So we're going to go back. Yeah.
We're going to go back to it. We're going to book in the interview with this question. Now, we found out the origin story of your podcast and blog, ChemoSkinny, and how that all came into being. And I'm a nerd. I love origin stories. Origin stories really set the table for our heroes and get to see what they did and how they did and what they become. And that's part of the fun of fandom. So, but as far as you being an actor and an entertainer, what were your influences as a younger person that made you say, this is what I want to be. This is what I want to do. I want to reach out to be an entertainer.
It started with the Brady Bunch.
Excellent. As one
Technically,
does.
I guess, Cousin Oliver. When Cousin Oliver came on the Brady Bunch, I made my mom, at 5, I saw it in syndication, made my mom write a letter to the affiliate ABC station to ask if I could be on it. And they said no, because it hadn't been on the air for many, many years. But if I wanted to, I could go to acting class. They were kind enough to write back, which was amazing.
Oh, that's very sweet.
But it started there. And then it was Olivia Newton-John, and it was Grease and Olivia Newton-John. I wanted to do musical theater. And it was Brady Bunch, Olivia Newton-John, and Carrie Fisher. Carrie Fisher in Star Wars. Carrie Fisher and specifically Harrison Ford in Star Wars. And it was basically all of those things that just made me go, oh, this is what I want to do. And I'm a kid in the Midwest with a family who has no connection to it. So I'm going to try and figure out how to do that. And so it led me to, in second grade, is it second grade? No, third grade, I think it was. Third or fourth grade, I started writing plays. I was supposed to do a report about Louis Pasteur, and I convinced my teacher to let me do a play instead. So we did a play about Louis Pasteur. And so instead of writing reports, I would write plays. Thank God for St. Edward's Catholic School. They allowed me to get away with it. And then we moved from Racine, Wisconsin to the suburbs of Chicago to Naperville, Illinois. And they had a summer stock. And I moved, and when I was in junior high, I went to summer stock. I was in Cinderella. I was one of the ladies in waiting because I didn't have enough guts to audition for Cinderella, which I will kick myself always. And then high school, junior high and high school, we had a pretty robust theater program in my high school, which was pretty remarkable. So I was involved in that for 4 years, and then found somebody who my aunt lived in Chicago, and her daughter went to the same school as Daryl Hannah's mom, and they were friends. And she asked this woman if I wanted to be an actress, what do I do? And she said I should go to college. I'm like, okay. And she told me that the 3 schools that were the best schools to go to were Northwestern, Yale, and NYU. So that's what I applied for and auditioned for. I didn't realize she was talking about the grad schools at the time, but whatever. And I auditioned and I got into NYU. And I went to NYU, and then it was like, it was just kind of like, I come from a blue collar background. So thank God for that, because it is very much blue collar work. It's very glamorous when you get to see, the premieres and everything else. Mm-hmm. But it's just, you got to just it's everybody who's, as the world changes and people are starting to not be in the same careers for a long time, and people are jobbers. Like, I'm kind of like, yeah, that's been my life since the beginning. So, and you keep going, you just keep going. And it's, in certain respects, it's attrition. And at various points, I've been like, do I really need to do this? I'm a fitness instructor, and I'm good at that. And I'm good at these other things. Maybe I don't want to do this acting thing. And so I would give myself a break, an emotional, creative break, and realize that mm-hmm. my life was not as in Technicolor without it. And realized that being on a set in particular, being in a play, yes, but the collaborative nature of being on a set, of creating with other people, was the thing that lit my fire. And I work at a gym, and I've worked there for 18 years now, I think. And at certain points, people have been like, well, maybe you should be a manager. And I've always said, well, the problem with that is when I'm on set, even if I'm saying one line, I'm just filling in, I'm just there. If the gym burned down, I wouldn't care. Now, I don't want anyone to get hurt, but it's the thing of like, nothing else exists when I'm here. So I think that I should stick with this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a good answer. If that's what drives you. I mean, the other thing is nice to, keeps you busy, gives you something to fill your time and fill your soul a little bit. But that sounds like that the acting is what tops you off.
Yeah. Well, it can, and it can break your heart, but I never regret not doing it. The idea of, I think part of maybe my problem is I've never been somebody who's like, I'm going to get it. Like, I've never been that person who's like, this is how my life is going to go, which is good, because I would have never in a million years thought that shaving my head, getting cancer, would suddenly be the point in time where suddenly I found some like really sizable momentum in my career. And it's a weird thing when that happens, because there's part of you that's like, I haven't done anything different, seeming like you try to figure out what did you do different. And sometimes and I feel like nothing, you have been authentically you. And I think that cancer for me was, I was like auditioning, everything was less precious because when you're not, I think that is that thing of when you're not in the industry. I found that for me, getting jobs was easier when I thought about them as jobs rather than when I thought of them as art, because there's something that puts a block in between me creating. Like, I'm trying to do this. Like, it lessens it somehow. Whereas I've met people who are born in the industry, and there's a reverence for it, but it's different because they understand. Oh yeah, it's work. Oh yeah, it's a natural thing to be here. And when you've just looked at it from the outside and you've tried to find your way in, sometimes you kind of get a little held back by the magnitude of it. And then suddenly you're inside-ish or whatever. And you're like, oh, not that it's hard, but you put these weird blocks up sometimes. I don't know. And this is for, different people, but for me anyway.
Oh, but I think that's really good advice, though, for people who are maybe thinking of pursuing this as a career, who, maybe they did try out for Cinderella, instead of, and then they want to make this a career opportunity for themselves, to know that there are these other challenges, and it's not going to be all just, red carpets and camera flashes, and that there's other things that are attached to that. So I think that's a really good perspective on it.
Yeah. It's sometimes a weird thing because I've heard people be like, never have a backup plan. And I'm just like, I'm from the Midwest, man. I come from parentage. My father, until he died, was telling me to go and be a manager at the gym, because for him, having a job, having security, having a 9 to 5, like that was the thing he needed to know that I was okay with, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was like, do not do this thing that is super risky in its own right. And I kind of came to my mother, they got a divorce, and she was a seamstress and a costume maker. And she was incredibly happy and managed to make everything work. And so I just became the person that was like, look, I just need to make sure my rent is paid and I have health insurance, which has become very important now. If I can make sure those things are taken care of, like I know where my stuff's coming from, that's just and it's what I need for me. I need to know that's taken care of, and then I can go and do whatever. And so you figure it out, you just figure it out.
Nice. Yeah, I understand. Being the Midwest, there's always, it's the stability of people want the 9 to 5, the paycheck to paycheck, live that life. And I get that. It's funny because my wife and I come from two very different backgrounds. My father's been self-employed my entire life.
Okay.
Her father worked at Michigan State for 30 years, and her mother was a charge nurse at the local hospital for 30 years. And, so they always they came from the workaday life. And my mom and dad were like, hey, you want to go do this? Well, hey, we'll just close up the shop for a couple of days. We'll go take off over here. Our rent will be paid. Our this will be paid. That'll be taken care of. And so the first couple of years of our life was very interesting for my wife and I, because trying to mesh those two
perspectives, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little more interesting than people give it credit for.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's that. My wife's a saint, by the way. She puts up with me. So just in case she's listening. Hi, honey. Love you.
Love you. Good. Hi.
Hi. Smoochy. You're wonderful. Okay. So Stephanie, we have made our way to the silly question portion of this game show.
Okay.
So we came up with this, and I say we because now normally we have a couple different co-hosts that come on the show with me. There's Ben and Kathleen has a 5-year-old daughter named Honora. And well, anyway, one day Kathleen was out with Honora, and somebody asked Honora this question, but not Kathleen. And Kathleen thought it was a little, sad
rude.
That people at a certain point no longer get asked this question because they're an adult.
Right.
So, Stephanie Czajkowski, what's your favorite dinosaur?
T-Rex, I think. I have to go with a T-Rex.
Solid answer.
Yeah.
I'm good with that. I like it. Mainly because I think of Deadpool and, everybody fears the T-Rex. So, yeah.
I can't help it. I like the little arms,
Right? I got a big head, little arms. Yeah. Meet the Robinsons. I love that movie. All right. Very good, Steffi. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for being on the show today. Where can our listeners and followers go to find out more about you and anything you got coming up?
At the moment, the best place to go is my IG handle at skisays, SKISAYS. Apparently, I forgot to renew my website, which used to be stephanieczajkowski.com, and I guess a Chinese graphic game, somebody hacked it and owns it now, so I have to figure out what my website is. So right now, Instagram is the best place.
Very good. All right. We'll make sure that we link that down below. And yeah, I did go to the aforementioned website and I was like, I don't think that's Stephanie's anymore.
It's not. I've done the I've gone in the research and they're like, you can buy it back for, and I'm like, no, dude, I'm not paying you like $100 for this. So now now maybe I'm going to have to put it up on Instagram and we'll be like, am I going to be stephanieczajkowski.org? I'm going to be stephanieczajkowski.net. Like, I can be stephaniemmczajkowski.com,
There you go.
.edu.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, there you go. Tie it into a school somewhere. It'll be fine.
It'll be my own school.
All right. Yeah, we'll make sure we put that Instagram link down below for our listeners so they can check it out and go see all the cool stuff you've got on there. So guys, we want to remind you that subscribing is the single most important thing you can do to help our show continue to grow, get amazing guests like Stephanie here to come on, talk with us and share these super cool stories and have funny moments for you to be able to listen to. So please subscribe. It helps out well more than I'll ever really be able to tell you. And go check out Stephanie as well. She's got some cool stuff on her Instagram page. I would know that because I did some light stalking research. It was a lot of fun. Anyway, thanks again, Stephanie. Really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And on that note, guys, that'll do it for the FSF Podcast. Goodbye.
Copyright 2024 FSF Podcast. Reference to any specific product or entity mentioned on this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by FSF Podcast. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact us via email at info@fsfpodcast.com.